There are things about our land that my family never understood, until the day a sealed root cellar decided to speak for itself. My name is Hannah Mercer, and on the morning they buried my grandmother Ruth, I thought I had already lost everything worth losing. I was wrong. What I lost in the 2 weeks that followed made that funeral look like a kindness. The farm, the house, the savings, the name on every deed and every account. All of it stripped from me by the people who shared my blood and who had never once shared the weight of a single harvest. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my grandmother had sealed a root cellar behind the old smokehouse in the spring of 1971, and she had handed me the key 3 days before she died. She pressed it into my palm with fingers that still smelled like the black earth of the Northfield, and she said, "Hannah, you don't open this until the world has taken everything from you. Not a day sooner. You'll know when." I thought she was rambling. The morphine had been heavy on her that week. I slipped the key into the pocket of my work coat and forgot about it the way you forget about a him you used to know. 2 weeks later, standing in the gravel driveway of the farmhouse I had lived in my entire life, watching my stepbrother Garrett change the locks while my stepmother Donna read aloud from a will I had never seen and did not believe was real, I remembered the key. I remembered the exact pressure of Grandma Ruth's thumb against my knuckles, and I remembered her voice clearer than any voice I had heard since. "You'll know when." I knew. This is the story of what I found in that cellar. It's the story of a woman who spent 63 years on the same 400 acres of Iowa ground, and what she buried there while the rest of the family slept. It's the story of how a farm that my family swore was worthless turned out to be the thing they had been fighting over their whole lives without even knowing why. Before we go any further, if you've ever been the one who stayed when everyone else left, the one who carried the weight without being thanked, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know who you are. The Mercer farm sits in the bottom country of Henderson County, Iowa, where the land rolls soft and the black soil runs deeper than a man is tall. 412 acres. If you counted the timber, my great-grandfather Isaiah Mercer broke the first sod in 1906. My grandfather Calvin worked it until his heart gave out in the Northfield in the spring of 1979. My grandmother Ruth worked it for 46 years after that, with a stubbornness that the whole county talked about at the grain elevator and at the coffee counter at Dell's Diner on the square in Fayette. And me, I worked it alongside her from the time I was 7 years old. My mother, Calvin and Ruth's only daughter, died of a brain aneurysm when I was 6. My father, Thomas Mercer, her husband, who had taken her family name when they married because his own father had been a mean drunk he wanted nothing to do with, raised me on the farm for a while. Then, when I was 11, he met Donna at a church potluck in Cedar Rapids, and Donna came with 2 kids of her own. Garrett, 4 years older than me. Lindsay, 2 years older. Both of them city-raised, both of them allergic to anything that couldn't be plugged into a wall. Donna made it clear, in that soft voice she used when she wanted to seem reasonable, that the farm was no place to raise modern children. She pushed and she pushed, and by the time I was 14, my father had moved us off the home place and into a ranch house in Fayette, 30 miles away. Grandma Ruth stayed on the farm alone. She was 68 years old, and she managed 200 head of cattle and a rotation of corn and soybeans by herself, because she would not leave the ground my grandfather was buried in. I went out to her every weekend, every school break, every summer from the day school, let out in May to the day it started again in August. I learned how to run the International 1066 tractor when I was 12. I learned how to pull a calf in February at 2 in the morning when I was 15. I learned the field tile map of that farm, which lines drained into the creek, which ones backed up in the wet years, the way other girls my age learned the words to pop songs. My father died of a stroke when I was 19. It was fast. He was gone before the ambulance reached the house. And at the funeral, Donna held my hand in the receiving line and told everyone what a comfort I had been to my father in his last years. And I believed her, because I wanted to. I was 19 and I had just lost the last parent I had. And I wanted to believe that my stepmother loved me. After the funeral, I moved back to the farm full-time to help Grandma Ruth. I was 20 years old. I had a half-finished associate's degree from the community college in Cedar Rapids that I never went back and finished. Ruth needed me. The farm needed me. And the truth was, I needed them more than they needed me, because there was nowhere else on earth I had ever belonged. For 13 years, that's how it was. Me and Grandma Ruth on the home place, working the ground, running the cattle, keeping the books at the kitchen table under a lamp that had been there since before I was born. In those 13 years, I watched Donna remarry twice and divorce twice. I watched Garrett drift through 3 failed businesses in Des Moines, each one funded by a loan Donna took out somewhere. I watched Lindsay marry a man named Brent who sold specialty insurance and never once came out to farm in 8 years of marriage. They came at Christmas. They came at Easter, sometimes. They came when Ruth had her hip replaced, and Donna needed to be seen as a caring daughter-in-law in front of the nursing staff. Otherwise, the farm existed for them as a line item in some future calculation. A thing that would eventually be theirs because, as Donna liked to remind the room whenever the subject came up, Tom's girl is family, of course, but Tom's children are family too, and fair is fair. She said it like she was being generous. I never once in 22 years heard her call me Hannah in front of other people. I was always Tom's girl, like a stray that had come with the man. Grandma Ruth heard it. She heard everything. She didn't correct Donna, because Ruth was not a woman who argued in kitchens, but she would catch my eye across the table, and she would give me the small, flat look that said, I know what she is, and I know what you are, and one day this will all come out the way it needs to. I trusted that look. I trusted it for years. Ruth started slipping in the fall of 2023. Small things at first. She forgot the word for the part of the combine she had been operating since 1974. She drove the pickup into the mailbox on a clear afternoon. By the spring of 2025, she was having trouble on the stairs, and by the fall, the doctor was saying the word hospice in a careful, level voice. Donna started coming out to the farm more. Garrett came with her. Lindsay sent cards. Donna was suddenly very concerned about Grandma Ruth's medications, Grandma Ruth's appointments, Grandma Ruth's legal affairs. She kept using that phrase, legal affairs, like it was a fence she was walking. She brought over a woman from Cedar Rapids once, an attorney named Margaret Voss, who I had never seen before and whom Ruth did not seem to recognize either. They sat in the front room with the door half closed, and I worked in the kitchen and tried not to listen. When they came out, Donna was bright and busy, and Margaret Voss shook my hand too firmly and did not meet my eyes. Grandma Ruth did not mention the visit afterward, not once. But 3 nights before she died, she woke me at 2 in the morning. She was sitting up in the bed I had set up for her in the downstairs parlor, and she was more lucid than she had been in weeks. She asked me to bring her the tin box from the top shelf of her closet. I brought it. She opened it with hands that shook, and she took out a long iron key, the kind with the hollow shaft and the teeth cut into the end, the kind that opens a door that was built before most of us were born. She put the key in my palm. Hannah, she said. Her eyes were clear and wet. The root cellar behind the smokehouse. The one your grandfather and I sealed up the summer before he died. You don't open that door for anybody, you hear me? Not your stepmother. Not Garrett. Not the lawyer. Whoever the lawyer turns out to be. Not even me, if somebody tells you I said to. You don't open it until the world has taken every last thing from you, and you have nothing left. That's when you open it. That's what it's for. I said, Grandma, what's in it? She said, the answer to a question you haven't learned to ask yet. Then she closed my fingers around the key, and she lay back down, and she did not speak of it again. She died on a Tuesday, just after noon, while I was standing at the window watching a red-tailed hawk work the fence row of the north field. The last breath went out of her, and the hawk took a prairie vole out of grass at the same moment. And I have never been able to tell anyone about that without feeling like I'm being sentimental, but it happened exactly that way. I put the iron key in the inside pocket of my Carhartt coat. I zipped the pocket closed, and I went back to being the person who kept the farm running, because that's what Ruth would have wanted, and that's what had to be done. The funeral was on a Saturday. By Monday morning, Donna was at the kitchen table with a manila envelope, and the man from the funeral home had not even picked up the folding chairs from the church yet. She brought Margaret Voss with her. Garrett was there. Lindsay, too, in a black dress she had clearly bought the day before at the Kohl's in Cedar Rapids, the tag still faintly visible at the collar. Brent, the insurance husband, stood by the door like a man who had been told to look official. Donna opened a manila envelope with the performance of a woman who was about to read something she very much wanted to read. "This is your grandmother's last will and testament," she said to me, her voice gentle and terrible. "Signed and notarized on October 14th, 2024. Margaret has the original." Margaret Voss produced a second copy, bound in a blue cover, and set it on the table. "Your grandmother," Donna went on, "thought very carefully about what she wanted for this family. She wanted unity. She wanted stability. She wanted to make sure the farm stayed in the hands of people who could carry it forward in the modern world." She read the terms, "the farmhouse and all household goods," to Donna Mercer as the surviving spouse of Thomas Mercer, and therefore, by the language of the document, the next generation of family stewardship. 412 acres, divided between Garrett and Lindsay in equal shares, 60-40 in Garrett's favor because of, and Donna read this part twice, his, demonstrated commitment to the agricultural legacy of the Mercer name. The cattle operation to be liquidated, with the proceeds split 3 ways between Donna, Garrett, and Lindsay. The account at Farmer State Bank in Fayette to Donna. To me, Hannah Mercer, granddaughter of Ruth Mercer. 1 tractor, a 1971 John Deere 4020, non-operational, located in the West Machine Shed. 1 rusted disc harrow, and a cash bequest of $5,000, in appreciation of her companionship to my grandmother in her final years. Companionship. 13 years of my life. 412 acres worth of labor. The calves I pulled in the dark. The tile lines I dug myself the summer the contractor ghosted us. Every meal I made that woman. Every dose of medicine I measured. Every load of laundry I carried up those stairs when her hip was bad. Companionship. Garrett, across the table, made a small noise that I realized was a laugh he was trying to swallow. I said nothing. I looked at Margaret Voss, and Margaret Voss looked at the tablecloth. I looked at Donna, and Donna was already moving past the will to practical matters. The locks would be changed today. A moving company had been scheduled for my belongings. There was a list of items she wanted to confirm were not personal to me before they went into the estate inventory. "Of course you're welcome to stay in town while you get on your feet," Donna said, in that soft voice. "I can ask around at the church. I'm sure someone has a room." Garrett said, "There's no need to make this harder than it is. Hannah, Mom's being more than fair." Lindsay said, "I hope you understand this isn't personal." I stood up. I walked to the hall closet, and I put on my Carhartt coat. I could feel the key through the lining against my ribs. I said, "I'd like to take a walk on the place before the locks get changed. Is that acceptable?" Donna's face did something complicated. She wanted to say no. She wanted to start the clock running. But there were witnesses, Margaret Voss, Brent, and the room had ears. She said, "Of course, dear. Take your time." I walked out the back door, past the smokehouse, past the old chicken coop, past the lilac bush my grandmother had planted the year my mother was born. I did not go to the root cellar. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I wasn't empty enough. I walked out to the north field instead, to the spot where the hawk had been working the morning Ruth died, and I stood there in the cold late autumn wind, and I let what had just happened in that kitchen land on me the way a body lets a blow land when it can't brace for it anymore. And then, standing there, I remembered something. Ruth had said, "You don't open it until the world has taken every last thing from you." The world hadn't taken everything yet. Not quite. They still had me standing on my grandmother's ground. They still had me in the coat she had given me. They still had me upright. Let them take the rest. Let them do their worst. And then I would go to the cellar. I walked back to the house. Donna met me at the back porch with a laminated list and a pen. Garrett trailed behind her with 2 cardboard boxes. They walked me through my own bedroom while I packed, and Donna checked items off against her inventory. Not the quilt. That was Ruth's mother's. That's estate property. Not the books on the shelf. Those came with the room. Not the jewelry box. "Dear, I'm sorry, but that was your grandmother's." They let me keep my clothes. My laptop. A framed photograph of me and Ruth at the Henderson County Fair in 2019. The pair of rubber boots by the back door, because Donna said those were clearly personal. Garrett loaded the boxes into the bed of my pickup, which at least was still mine, because it was titled in my name. Lindsay did not come out to say goodbye. Donna stood on the porch and waved, and her face was sad and pleasant, the way you'd wave at someone leaving a wedding. I drove to the end of the long gravel lane. I stopped at the mailbox. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, and I watched in the rearview mirror as a man from a locksmith truck pulled into the driveway I had just left. I had $800 in my checking account. I had a pickup truck with half a tank of gas. I had a coat with an iron key zipped into the inside pocket. The world had taken everything. I turned the truck around. I drove back up the lane, past the house, around the back of the machine shed, where Donna wouldn't see me from the kitchen, and I parked the truck behind the old corn crib. I killed the engine. I got out. I walked across the frozen yard toward the smokehouse and the sealed door that waited behind it. The root cellar was set into the side of a low earthen rise behind the smokehouse, the way my great-grandfather had built it in 1908, and the way my grandfather Calvin had rebuilt it in 1951 after a tornado took the original off. The door was oak, thick as my hand, banded with iron straps that my grandfather had forged himself at the little farrier's setup he used to keep in the back of the barn. There was no padlock. The lock was built into the door, a mortise lock as old as the cellar itself, the keyhole a blackened slot in the iron. The door had been sealed with a bead of tar along the frame the summer my grandfather died. That was what people in the family knew, that the cellar had flooded once, or had collapsed, or had become unsafe for some reason, and Calvin had tarred it shut the spring before his heart failed him, and Ruth had never reopened it. In 46 years of running that farm, she had never once gone in. That was a family story. Nobody questioned it. There were a dozen other outbuildings that got more use. The cellar was just a sealed door in a grassy hillside, and the tar had weathered black and hard, and briars had grown up along the bottom edge. I knelt in the dead grass in front of the door. I pulled a pocket knife out of my jeans, and I scored the tar seam along the frame. It had gone brittle with age, and it came away in long, hard curls. It took me maybe 20 minutes. The wind had picked up, and somewhere back at the house I could hear Donna's voice carrying. She was on the phone, probably to the moving company, probably arranging the rest of my life. I took the key out of my coat. I slid it into the mortise lock. It went in smooth. Ruth had kept it oiled. 46 years of oil, applied to a lock she never used, on a door she told everyone was sealed for good. My hands were shaking, not from the cold. I turned the key. The lock turned like it had been turned yesterday. I pulled the iron ring. The door resisted the frame, stuck from the weather, and then gave all at once with a long, low-grown hinges. The smell that came out of the dark was not what I expected. I had expected mold, rotten potatoes, the sweet sickness of a place that had been closed for half a century. What came out was clean and dry, the smell of stone and cedar and paper. I took the flashlight off my keychain, and I went down the steps. There were 7 steps. I counted them then, and I have counted them in my head every night since. The cellar opened up at the bottom into a single room, maybe 12 feet by 15, with a stone floor and stone walls my great-grandfather had laid by hand. The ceiling was low. I am 5'6", and I could just stand upright. Cedar shelves along 3 walls, a workbench along the 4th, and everything was dry. This was not a root cellar anymore. This was not a place for potatoes and jars of tomatoes and onions on slatted shelves. This was an archive. The shelves were lined with boxes, fireproof steel file boxes, the kind lawyers use, stacked 2 and 3 high. Each one had a paper label on the front in my grandmother's handwriting, and on some of them, in an older hand, I recognized from the letters in her bureau, my grandfather Calvin's hand. Leases 1952 to 1979. Plats and surveys. Mineral, north half. Mineral, south half. Correspondence, Texaco. Correspondence, Amaco. Heritage Soil Program 1968. A dozen other labels I couldn't read from where I stood. On the workbench, laid out as deliberately as place settings at a dinner, were 3 things. A leather-bound ledger, the kind farmers used to keep for decades at a time. A long mailing tube, sealed with wax, and a white envelope with my name on it, written in my grandmother's hand. Hannah Mercer. Open first. I sat down on the stone floor. I didn't mean to. My legs just gave. I picked up the envelope. I opened it. It was a letter, 3 pages long, written on the farm stationery Ruth had used since I was a child. It was dated September 2024, 6 weeks before she signed the will Donna had just read to me in the kitchen. A will that, as I sat there on the cold stone floor, I was beginning to understand had been her last and most private act of love. The letter began, "My Hannah, if you have opened this door, it is because the thing I was afraid of has happened. I am sorry, my girl. I am so very sorry. I fought it the best I could. But your stepmother is a patient woman, and she has been laying her groundwork for longer than you know. And I am old, and I am tired, and I do not know how much of me is left to fight with. What I'm going to tell you in this letter is going to sound impossible. Read it anyway. Read it twice, and then go to boxes on the east wall and read everything in the one labeled mineral, north half, and you'll understand what your grandfather and I built for you and why we built it in the dark." I read the first page. I read the second. By the third, I was crying so hard I had to set the letter down on the floor to keep the tears from smudging the ink. Because what Ruth was telling me, in her plain, careful handwriting, was this. In 1968, a petroleum geologist from a subsidiary of a company that would eventually be folded into a Mako had approached my grandfather Calvin about leasing the mineral rights under the north half of the Mercer farm, 206 acres. The geologist believed there was natural gas in the Pennsylvanian Formation a mile beneath our topsoil. Calvin, being Calvin, had not simply signed. He had driven to Iowa City and talked to a lawyer at the university. And then he had driven to Tulsa and talked to a second lawyer whose name had been given to him by a neighbor who had leased minerals in Oklahoma. And then, in the winter of 1969, Calvin had quietly done something that, in 1969 in Henderson County, Iowa, no farmer he knew had ever done. He had severed the mineral estate from the surface estate. He had filed the severance with the county recorder. He had done it in the name of a trust he had created, the Mercer Family Mineral Trust, and he had named a single beneficiary, his unborn granddaughter, my mother's child, who at the time did not exist. Me. He did not tell my grandmother right away. He told her in 1971, and that was the summer they sealed the root cellar, because by then Calvin had leased the minerals under the north half to the petroleum company for a signing bonus and an ongoing royalty, and he had leased the minerals under the south half, 206 more acres, to a different company that had come sniffing 6 months after first. And the checks had started to come, and they had not stopped. 46 years of checks, quarterly, 4 times a year, deposited into an account that was not at Farmer State Bank in Fayette, because Calvin did not trust Farmer State Bank in Fayette to keep its mouth shut. The account was at a trust bank in Des Moines. The account was in the name of the Mercer Family Mineral Trust. And the trustee, since Calvin's death in 1979, had been my grandmother Ruth. The beneficiary for 46 years had been me. Ruth's letter on the third page told me what the balance of that trust was as of the last statement she had reviewed, which was August 2024. It was not a small number. I am not going to put the number in this part of the story, because the number is not the point. The point is what happened next in that cellar. The point is what I read in the box labeled Mineral, North Half, and the box labeled Plats and Surveys, and the box labeled Correspondence, Texaco. The point is what my grandfather and grandmother had protected me from for 54 years before I was born and 54 years after. The point is what was in the ledger on the workbench, which, when I opened it, turned out to be a second set of books, the real books, for every dollar that had flowed onto that farm since 1969. Books that did not match the books Donna had been looking at when she built her will. If the story is moving you, hit the like button and turn on the bell so you never miss another story like this one. I want to keep telling you what I found. I want to keep telling you what the dirt under our feet had been holding for us the whole time. But I need you here for it. Stay with me. I spent the rest of that afternoon in the cellar. I did not go back to the house. Donna, I assumed, believed I had driven away when I drove up the lane and around the machine shed. She had been on the phone. She hadn't looked out the window. I was, as far as she knew, gone. A problem she had solved. The cellar had a battery lantern on a hook by the door that Ruth must have replaced every few years, because when I turned on, it worked. I sat on the stone floor in its yellow light, and I read. The box-labeled plats and surveys held a folder from 1969, the original severance filing, stamped by the Henderson County Recorder on February the 9th of that year. The severance had been filed properly, under the correct statute, with the correct legal description of the property. It had been recorded, which meant it was public, in theory, for anyone who went looking for it. But nobody had gone looking. Nobody in Donna's camp. Nobody at her lawyer Margaret Voss's office. Because nobody had any reason to think a farmer in Henderson County in 1969 would have severed mineral rights into a trust for an unborn grandchild. That was not what Iowa farmers did. That was Oklahoma stuff. Texas stuff. Not us. My grandfather had been a quiet man. I knew that from Ruth. He was not the kind of man who told the neighbors what he was doing. He was not the kind of man who told his own daughter what he was doing. And my mother, growing up on that farm, had never known about the trust. When she died in 1998, she had not known. When my father married her, he had not known. When my father married Donna, he had not known. When my father died, he had not known. Ruth had known. Ruth had known for 54 years. And Ruth had kept it because Calvin had asked her to keep it. And because, as she wrote in her letter, the money would have ruined every one of them, my girl. Your mother would have spent it on her restlessness. Your father would have let Donna spend it on her children. Donna would have found a way to put all in Garrett's name, and then watch Garrett lose it at a card table in Des Moines. The only person on this earth who was ever going to treat this land the way your grandfather and I treated it was you. And we couldn't know you would be born, Hannah, but we could protect the ground until we found out. The box label correspondence. Texaco held 46 years of royalty statements. Quarterly, every one of them. Ruth had filed them the way Ruth filed everything. By year, by quarter, in plastic sleeves. The company name had changed 3 times as the original lessee had been bought and merged. Texaco, then Chevron, then a smaller operator that had taken over the Iowa leases when the big companies lost interest in marginal Midwest gas plays. The checks had gotten smaller in some years and bigger in others, but they had never stopped. The box label Mineral. South Half told the same story with a different company. Amaco, then BP, then a subsidiary in Oklahoma. Same pattern, same decades, same trust. And in the box labeled Heritage Soil Program 1968, there was something else, something I had not expected. My grandfather had enrolled the entire 412 acres back in 1968 in a conservation program run through Iowa State University. He had set aside the field buffers, the timber, the creek corridor. The program had been small at the time. It had grown. By the time of Ruth's death, the conservation easements on the property, the ones my grandfather had put in place and my grandmother had renewed every 10 years for half a century, were generating their own annual payments. Not as large as the mineral royalties, but not small, and, crucially, legally binding. The land could not be subdivided. The land could not be sold for development. The land could be farmed, pastured, or left in timber, and nothing else, in perpetuity. Donna, when she built her will, the will Garrett and Lindsay were already, I suspected, calculating how to carve into lakeside lots and sell off, had not known about the easements either, because the easements, like the mineral severance, were filed at the county recorder's office under the name of the Mercer Family Mineral Trust, and the trust was not a name that appeared anywhere in the surface deed she had been working from. The surface deed said Ruth Mercer in fee simple. That was what Donna's will had given away. The mineral estate, the trust, and the easement said something different. I sat on the stone floor in the cellar, and I started, slowly, to understand what my grandfather and my grandmother had built. They had built a fence. A fence the law would not let anyone tear down. A fence that ran a mile beneath the soil and along every timber edge and every creek bank. And that fence had my name on the inside of it, and everyone else on the outside. I picked up the ledger on the workbench. I opened it. The first entry was March 1971. Deposit. Texaco's signing bonus. For H.M. my grandfather had written it in anticipation of me, 15 years before I was born, using my initials the way a carpenter writes a measurement on a piece of lumber before he cuts. The last entry was October 2024. Ruth's hand, slower than it had been, still legible. A quarterly statement reconciled and signed off, the way she had signed off every quarter for 46 years. In between, there were thousands of entries, every check that had come in, every tax payment the trust had made, every legal fee, every annual review with the trust bank in Des Moines, every renewal of every easement, every lease extension, every contract amendment when the companies had been bought and sold. It was the most meticulous, patient, unbroken piece of paperwork I had ever seen in my life. It was the work of two people, across 2 generations, and I understood in that moment that my grandmother had not simply been running a farm for 46 years. She had been running a farm, and she had been running this, quietly, alone, through every night of every winter, without ever telling a living soul, not even my mother, because my mother could not be trusted not to tell, and not even my father, because my father, God love him, had married Donna, and Donna could not be trusted with anything. And at the end Ruth had seen coming for a long time, I think she had made one decision. She had let the surface will go. She had let Donna draft it. She had let Margaret Voss notarize it. She had signed it, knowing what it said, knowing it would cut me out of the farmhouse and the cattle and the bank accounts at Farmer State in Fayette, because Ruth knew something I had not understood until that afternoon. Ruth knew that a will can be contested, but trust has been in place for 54 years. With 54 years of documented administration, cannot. She had given Donna the bait. She had given Donna the will that looked like victory. And she had left me, in the cellar, the thing that was real, the second letter. The one I found tucked into the back of the ledger, between the last entry and the end paper. A single page. Not to me, to Margaret Voss. Dear Margaret, it read, by the time you receive this letter, my granddaughter Hannah will have retained counsel of her own, and you will be hearing from them directly. I want you to know, so that you are not surprised, that every representation Donna Mercer made to you about the ownership and disposition of the Mercer farm was incomplete. The surface estate is hers to will. The rest is not, and has not been for more than 50 years. I do not blame you. You are doing your job. But I would encourage you, before you let Donna execute any further action on this property, to search the Henderson County Recorder's Index under the name Mercer Family Mineral Trust. Everything you need is there. Everything that was hidden from you is hidden because my husband and I chose to hide it, for reasons that will become clear. I am sorry for the inconvenience. Please do the right thing. Ruth Mercer. I sat in that cellar, in the yellow light of the lantern, and I understood that my grandmother had built me a door, not just a door of the root cellar, a door out of every wall they had put me behind. I understood that I was not going to have to argue. I was not going to have to beg. I was not going to have to stand in a courtroom and say, my grandmother loved me. She meant this for me. They are lying. I was going to have to hand over a file. That was all. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading. When the sun dropped and the light through the cellar door dimmed, I closed the boxes I had opened, but I did not put anything back on the shelves. I loaded the letter, the ledger, the mailing tube, and 4 of the file boxes into the bed of my pickup. I covered them with a tarp. I relocked the cellar door with the iron key, and I put the key back in the inside pocket of my coat. I drove to the Super 8 on the edge of Fayette. I paid $69 for a room. I carried the boxes up to the room one at a time. I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed with the ledger open in my lap, and for the first time since my grandmother had died, I slept. The next morning, I drove to Iowa City. I had never hired a lawyer in my life. I did not have a lawyer, but my grandmother's letter had told me something. In the paragraph before she had told me about the trust, Ruth had written a name. If you need an attorney, and you will, call David Holcomb at Holcomb and Wren in Iowa City. He handled the trust reviews with me for the last 9 years. He knows everything. He has been waiting for your call. He is a good man. Tell him you are Hannah. I called from the parking lot of the Super 8 before I left. The receptionist put me through to David Holcomb without asking why. When he picked up, he said, Hannah, your grandmother told me to expect you. His voice sounded like a man who had been keeping a promise for a long time and was relieved to finally deliver on it. I drove to Iowa City. I met David Holcomb in a conference room on the fourth floor of an old brick building near the river. He was a man in his late 60s, tall, with the kind of plain, quiet face I had always associated with good country lawyers. He had the file on his desk already. He had had it for 9 years. I showed him the ledger. I showed him the letter to Margaret Voss. I showed him the contents of the 4 boxes I had brought. When I was done, he took off his glasses, and he rubbed the bridge of his nose for a long time. Then he said, "Hannah, I want to be very clear with you about what you are holding, because it is going to move fast once we move, and I need you to understand it before we do." He walked me through it. The Mercer Family Mineral Trust, he said, was valid. It had been valid since 1969. It had been administered continuously and correctly. The severance of the mineral estate from the surface estate had been recorded, and no action by any surface estate holder, including my grandmother's will, including Donna's will, including anything Donna had signed or could sign in the future, could touch it. The trust was, in legal terms, a separate property interest. It belonged to me. It had belonged to me before I was born. It had belonged to me every day of my life. The conservation easements, he said, were similarly untouchable. Donna could inherit the surface ground. Donna could not subdivide it. Donna could not sell it to a developer. Donna could not change its agricultural use. If Donna tried, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, working with Iowa State, had enforcement authority going back to 1968. The easements were the fence within the fence. And then David Holcomb said there was the matter of the will itself. Your grandmother, he said, was of sound mind when she signed that will. I confirmed it. She told me what she intended to do. She intended to give Donna the house and the surface ground and the cattle and the bank accounts. She was explicit about it. She was also explicit about why. He paused. She said, and I wrote this down, "Donna has worked 30 years to get her hands on my farm. Let her have the part she can hold. My granddaughter already has the part that matters. The part that matters has been hers since before she was born. All Donna will have inherited, in the end, is a house she can live in, a checking account she can spend down, and a herd of cattle she doesn't know how to sell. My granddaughter will have everything else, and my granddaughter will have it for the rest of her life." He folded his hands on the table. He looked at me. "Hannah," he said, "do you want to contest the will?" I thought about it. I thought about Donna at that kitchen table, her voice gentle and terrible. I thought about Garrett's laugh. I thought about Lindsay and the Coles tag. I thought about my father, who had never known, and my mother, who had never known, and my grandfather, who had died in a field in 1979 with a secret in his chest that had protected me my entire life. "No," I said, "I don't want to contest it." David Holcomb raised his eyebrows, but he didn't argue. "I want to notify Margaret Voss," I said, "of the existence of the trust and the easements. I want her to know what she signed off on. I want Donna to have the house. I want Donna to have the cattle and the bank accounts. I want her to have the surface on paper. And I want her to understand in writing that the minerals beneath that paper and the easements around it belong to me, and that nothing she does on the surface can touch them. I want her to keep the things she schemed for, and I want her to know exactly what they are and aren't worth." David Holcomb nodded slowly. "Hannah," he said, "that's not revenge." "No," I said, "it isn't." "What is it?" I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the hawk on the fence row. I thought about what Ruth had said the night she gave me the key, the answer to a question you haven't learned to ask yet. I had learned to ask it. "It's the truth," I said. "That's all I want. I want the truth delivered, on paper, to the people who try to bury it." The letter went out that Friday. It was 4 pages long on Holcomb and Wren letterhead, and it was accompanied by 42 pages of exhibits, recorded severance documents, trust administration records, conservation easement filings, a schedule of the 46 years of royalty income reconciled against the statements Ruth had kept in the cellar, a copy of my grandmother's letter to Margaret Voss. Margaret Voss called David Holcomb within 6 hours. She asked for a meeting. He gave her one on a Monday in the same conference room where I had first laid out the ledger. I was there. Donna was there. Garrett was there. Lindsay was not. She had a child with the flu, or so Brent said on her behalf. Margaret Voss opened the meeting. Her face had aged 10 years and 4 days. She said, in a voice that had none of the briskness I remembered from the kitchen, "I have reviewed the materials provided by Mr. Holcomb. I have independently verified the recording of the severance and the easements at the Henderson County Recorder's Office. I have spoken with a trustee of record at the Trust Bank in Des Moines. The trust is valid. The severance is valid. The easements are valid. My client's will gives her title to the surface estate only. Everything else belongs, and has belonged since 1969, to Hannah Mercer as sole beneficiary of the Mercer Family Mineral Trust." She did not look at Donna when she said it. Donna said, "That's not possible." David Holcomb slid a single sheet of paper across the table to her. The severance filing, stamped by the county recorder on February the 9th, 1969. A copy of a document that had been public record in a filing cabinet in Fayette for 57 years, that anyone could have walked in and asked to see, if anyone had thought to. Donna looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Her face changed in stages. First, disbelief. Then the pale, blank look of a woman running a calculation and finding that the numbers did not work. Then, finally, something I had not expected to see on Donna's face. Not in all the years I had known her. It looked like shame. It flickered. It was there, and then it was gone, shoved down on the practical face she always wore. But I saw it, and in that flicker, I understood something about my stepmother that I had not understood in 22 years of sharing a surname with her. Donna had never thought of herself as a thief. Donna had thought of herself as a woman who had built, brick by brick, an inheritance that a careless old farm family had been too disorganized to protect. In Donna's mind, she was not taking the farm away from me. She was rescuing the farm from a generation that did not deserve it. She believed that. She had believed it so thoroughly that she had built her whole life around it. And now, sitting in that conference room, she was being told, not by me, but by her own lawyer, on her own lawyer's letterhead, that she had misunderstood what the farm was, that my grandfather, 57 years earlier, had already rescued the farm from exactly the kind of rescue Donna had been planning, that the house and the cattle and the accounts at Farmers State Bank were not the treasure. They were the wrapper, and Donna had fought 30 years for the wrapper and mistaken it for what was inside. Garrett spoke then. His voice was thin. "What is the trust? What's the—" He could not finish the sentence. He was trying to ask for the number. David Holcomb looked at me. I nodded once. He said the number. Garrett made a sound in his throat that I will not try to describe. Donna closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was looking at the tablecloth, the way Margaret Voss had looked at the tablecloth 4 days earlier in the kitchen at the farm. Nobody spoke for maybe a full minute. I counted it out. I listened to the building's heating system click on. I watched a small brown leaf blow past the fourth-floor window. Then Donna said very quietly, "Hannah?" I looked at her. It was the first time I could remember, in 22 years, that she had used my name without putting Tom's girl in front of it. "I want you to understand," she said. Her voice was level, but it had a crack running through the middle of it. "I didn't know about any of this. I wouldn't have." She stopped. She wasn't sure what she wouldn't have done. That was the honest part. "Mom," Garrett said, and she held up a hand, and he stopped. "I married your father," Donna said, still looking at the tablecloth, "because I loved him. I want that to be clear. But I also married him because my first marriage had left me with 2 children, and a negative bank balance and a foreclosure notice, and I had promised myself, standing in the parking lot of the courthouse the day my divorce was finalized, that I was never going to be that poor again. I saw the farm, and I saw the Mercer name, and I saw a kind of permanence that I had never had access to in my life. And yes, I made decisions, a lot of decisions, over a lot of years, about how that farm was going to pass. I made them in front of your grandmother, and I made them behind her, and I made them with Margaret's help, and I am not going to pretend I did not make them." She looked up at me, and her eyes were wet. "But I didn't know," she said, "about the trust. I swear to you, if I had known." "I believe you didn't know," I said, "and I did. That, at least, I could give her. I don't think my grandmother intended for you to know. I think if you had known, she was afraid of what you would do." Donna absorbed that. The word afraid, applied to Ruth, landed on her like a slap. She was afraid of me? Donna said. She was afraid of what you would do to me. Through the farm. I said. There's a difference. Donna put her hand over her mouth. Garrett said, What happens now? David Holcomb took over. His voice was calm and clear. The voice of a man who had been carrying this conversation in his head for 9 years and knew exactly how it needed to end. Here is what happens now, he said. Mrs. Mercer, my client is not going to contest the will. She accepts the disposition of the surface estate exactly as your attorney drafted it. The house is yours. The cattle operation is yours to liquidate. The bank accounts are yours. My client is not going to ask for any of it back. In exchange, my client requires 3 things. First, a signed acknowledgement notarized from each of you, Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Garrett Mercer, and, when she is available, Ms. Lindsay Mercer Galt, stating that you are aware of the existence of the Mercer Family Mineral Trust and the conservation easements, that you have reviewed the documentation, and that you waive any and all claims, present or future, against the trust or its assets or its beneficiary. Second, a written agreement that the surface estate will not be sold, subdivided, or developed without my client's written consent for a period of 10 years. This is within the existing easement framework, but we want in a private instrument as well for clarity. Third, and this is my client's request, not a legal one. There is a young woman in this family, Ms. Lindsay Mercer Galt's daughter, I believe, my client's stepniece, age 7. He looked at me. I nodded. My client is establishing a separate educational trust for that child. It will be funded from the income of the mineral trust. It is not contingent on anything the child's parents do or don't do. It follows the child. My client's one condition is that Ms. Mercer Galt not interfere with the trust administration, and that the child's existence as a beneficiary be disclosed to her when she turns 18, not before, and that in the meantime the child be permitted to spend time on the farm with my client without restriction at reasonable frequency. Donna's eyes filled up again. Lindsay's daughter, Emma, was the only person in that whole side of the family I had ever felt a connection to. A quiet kid, like the cattle, had asked me at the last Christmas if she could come out in the summer and help me feed the calves. I had said yes. The summer had not come yet. She wants Emma to have, Donna said, and then stopped. She wants Emma to have what the rest of U.S. didn't give her, David Holcomb said. A person who protected her on the farm before she knew she needed it. Donna put her face in her hands. Garrett was crying, silently, the kind of crying that makes a grown man look about 14 years old. After a while, Donna said, without lifting her face, I'm sorry, Hannah. I said, I know you are. I did not say it's all right, because it wasn't all right, and it was not going to be all right, and my grandmother had not raised me to lie about things like that. But I said the thing that was true. I know you are, I said, and I am not going to carry this against you. I am not going to carry it against any of you. I am going to go home and run my farm, and you're going to keep your house, and Emma is going to come out for the summer, and we're going to see what any of us turn into from here. Garrett said, Hannah, and could not finish. He held out his hand across the table, and after a long moment, I took it. His hand was shaking. My hand was steady. I noticed that. I had not been steady in a long time. The paperwork took 3 weeks to close. Donna signed everything. Garrett signed everything. Lindsay, when Brent drove her to Iowa City, signed everything and then sat in the lobby of Holcomb and Wren for 20 minutes with her face in her hands before she came out and said to me, quietly, Can Emma come out over spring break too, or just the summer? I said, anytime. She said, Thank you, Hannah. I said, She's a good kid. She likes the calves. Lindsay laughed, a wet, cracked laugh, and she hugged me for the first time in 22 years. I was surprised to find that I hugged her back. Donna moved out of the farmhouse in the spring. She said she didn't feel right staying in it. She bought a small place in town, in Fayette, and she used some of the cattle liquidation money to pay down her other debts, and she went back to work part-time at the church office. Garrett moved to Des Moines and, as far as I know, has stayed out of trouble. Lindsay and Brent bring Emma out every other weekend in the spring and summer, and Emma has learned how to use the calf feeder, and next year, I'm going to let her drive the 40/20. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories on screen right now.